Andrew Hall, and this is Dead Hand Radio. My guest for this episode is Rock Sue. Rock is an artist, a dancer, a writer, and a musician. He's also has a love for cinema, which has motivated him to share his thoughts on movies and the arts in a blog he started some time ago. And he's recently started a YouTube channel dedicated to his many interests and talents. I'd like to encourage everyone to check out his channel, subscribe, because he's quite simply an inspiring and creative person, and his channel is sure to explode. Rock and I met on a social media platform called Lunch Club. We found many common interests during our previous conversation, but one thing stood out above the rest: an overwhelming appreciation for movies. And since this channel is about the Cold War, we discussed a collaborative episode to review and discuss the film Bridge of Spies. But before we get to the movie, we're going to talk a bit more about who Rock is and his journey to starting a YouTube channel about cinema and why that's such a good fit for him. Welcome to Dead Hand Radio, Rock.
Yeah, man. It's a pleasure to be here. This is one of my first times ever doing something like this, and so I'm excited. And yeah, I mean, it's like you said, right? Like we just really hit it off the first time we met, and we just kind of on a whim decided to do this collaborative effort, and I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, as am I. I thought I agree. I think we really made a connection, and we both have so many common interests that it just made sense. And you were at the very beginning of starting your YouTube journey, even though you had been blogging for quite some time up to that point. But
Yeah.
I figured, if this is an opportunity for you to help kickstart that channel, I'd be happy to do that. Plus, I'm always looking for interesting people to talk to, and I found you an interesting person. And like I said, we met on Lunch Club, which is an awesome platform. What do you think of the Lunch Club platform?
Yeah, yeah. So I've had a really positive experience with Lunch Club so far. I actually got on the platform right around the time the pandemic hit. And, with everything shut down, you can't really go outside as much without feeling like there's kind of like dangers to that and stuff. Like, just social activity just really hit like a dip when that happened. And so I found myself really drawn to the platform because it just kind of like matches you based off of like your interests and your profile and whatnot, and then it like matches you with people that are also free at the same times that you list, right? And so like at that point, like you just get matched with these people, and even though they are supposedly like people with shared interests, a lot of the time it's a very unexpected match. But almost in every case, it's been a very pleasant, unexpected match. Just like with you, right? It's like you get matched with this person who you otherwise might not have met at all in any sort of like social setting that you usually like typically would go to, and you end up just like building a connection with someone who is like completely a stranger at first, and then from there on you can like turn that into a collaboration or whatnot. So I really like the platform, and I've met a lot of interesting people, you included.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. As I might have mentioned this to you, but I felt like before I did my first meeting on the platform, I felt like it was probably going to be a waste of time. I was probably going to get matched up with somebody who was not in any way compatible,
Right.
but it was the total opposite. I enjoyed it, and every meeting I've had so far has been interesting. And
Yeah.
like I said, I like to hear people's perspectives, and that gives me a chance to meet new people and hear new perspectives. Um, so, moving on to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about you and how you came to, you know, get involved in and have such a passion for cinema and the arts. Um, but you have quite a contrasting education between the cinema and economics. How did that come about?
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something that I get asked about a lot. So I studied economics and film at USC for my undergrad, and growing up, I was always a very artistic and creative person. There's a lot of like creative things that I enjoyed doing, and that was what I spent most of my free time on. But then in school, I was always like a pretty like just I was always a pretty go-getter type of student. Like I always ensured like I was doing well in academics, regardless of the subject. And a lot of the subjects have nothing to do with with artistic things. And so when I went to college, I actually started out as an econ major with the intention of adding a second degree. That was something more along the lines of something creative, right? Because I knew that that is what really made me like happy in my free time and what I was passionate about. And so upon arriving at USC, everyone was saying like, "Oh, you got to check out the film department, take some classes." And so I did. And when I took my first class, it just made me realize that like I had been looking at movies in such a shallow way for like my entire life. Like growing up, I was just like a watch the latest superhero movie, or like Jurassic Park because dinosaurs are cool, or like Star Wars because I like laser swords. It was like that's everything that I watched, and I just consumed it because it was like fun entertainment, and I like the action and stuff like that. But then upon arriving at USC, that's where it kind of like made the artistic and the cinematic stuff like kind of click together. It made me realize that like film is such a great combination of a lot of different kinds of art forms that I'm really interested in, right? So if you think about like the cinematography, that's very like visual arts, right? If you think about performance, you put all the drama into that. There's a soundtrack, there's sound design, there's just all sorts of these things that are like drawing from different artistic media and combining it into one cohesive like story, right? And so that's what really drew me toward film. And so that's when I decided to add film as like a second degree. And so I went through college as a double major in economics and film. And I mean, as far as I know, I don't know anybody else that has had that same exact combination.
Yeah, it does seem kind of a unique, because they're not complementary at all. You probably didn't have, if any, you probably didn't have very many core courses that overlapped, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely no overlapping courses, but I would say that like the study of those two subjects themselves actually did overlap in the sense that a lot of the time, for example, when I was in my film classes, I was able to come at it from a kind of like business oriented background and talk about like, okay, well, I mean, I know why you don't like that decision that they put into the film because, artistically that's not the best, but I can tell you from the business perspective why they did that and how that was going to help them like achieve more success at the box office, right? So like I think that perspective was actually always really interesting for me to bring to the table. And likewise, I think like just the analytical aspect of both degrees. It's very analytical in both economics and film, and so like those kind of bled together as well. So I mean, especially yeah, if I'm doing both, I definitely try to find ways to like find synergies between the two.
Very cool. And with the economics degree, I'm sure that opened up some doors of opportunity for secured employment, um, and having a good income always allows you to pursue other creative endeavors, or endeavors of personal interest. So that's kind of a nice thing. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now I looked at your website, where you talk about the movies, and I've noticed that you cover a broad range of films. I mean, from science fiction and um, crime, you know, movies to you can name a couple of other um, the genres that you cover and talk a little bit about that if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a wide spectrum. I'm not the kind of person who like only watches a certain type of film. I will say that there's certain ones that like I gravitate towards. Like I'm a really big fan of like dramas, stuff that I find kind of like substantive in their like realism when they're especially when they're talking about some sort of like topic that is really relevant to like the human experience and whatnot. But sometimes I just watch a silly rom-com, and like I like Marvel movies, and I think if there's any genre that there's like a hardcore fandom for that I don't typically watch as much, it's probably like horror. Just like I just don't find as much enjoyment out of that, and I actually don't like action movies as much nowadays because um, like you really just watch them for like the coolest explosion and like the coolest like car chase and stuff like that. And so like so those kind of films are not my favorites because there's just like less to write about, right? So like you won't see them featured on like my blog, for example. But I still just like a broad spectrum of films, like you said.
What are your thoughts on the use of visual effects in films nowadays as opposed to the way it was in the 70s, where they used a lot more practical effects?
Yeah, well, I think that's a challenging question. I think that one thing that's really interesting about film that is unique about it compared to more traditional media is that it is so technology enabled, right? Like film, like if you study the history of film, it is entirely dependent on the advancements they made in terms of like how to capture motion on screen, right? Like, because you start with photography and that's just a still image, and then when they discovered that if you played a sequential set of images, within a certain frame rate, as long as it's fast enough, it starts making your eyes think that there's like something moving, right? And so like you start out with something like that, then you add color to it, you add sound to it, and all of these things required like great technological advancements. And so from that perspective and from like my perspective as like someone who works in business and things like that, it's like it's inevitable, right? Like they're going to find ways to take like the latest inventions and plug that into this existing art form that is already so technology oriented. And so like if that's going to be the case, right? Like if there are going to be visual effects that get added in this way because the technology is there, and because in some cases, right, you can do it more cheaply. In some cases, you can achieve effects that you otherwise couldn't achieve. You can just create narratives that are newer. Like there's some science fiction related things, for example, that you just can't achieve with traditional things, or you can't achieve to the same level. And so I see it as kind of like a broadening of like artistic freedom, because you can still make the traditional stuff if you would like, right? But it's just that maybe like the biggest blockbuster films are going to be the ones that are really tapping into that technology because of the massive budgets that they have. And so I think it really is ultimately a good thing because it expands the spectrum of like things that you can create because it's more technology enabled.
Good answer, and I totally agree with that. I know that during the 80s and the 90s, they struggled with a little bit of trying to overuse that technology. They weren't really that comfortable with these CGI advantages that they had, so they would really go overboard with them. But then in the late 90s and on in through the 2000s, I think they started to really hone their skills, and uh, the talent pool of people that were familiar with using that technology uh, really started to catch up with the technology and learned how to use it correctly.
Mm,
And then once they started combining the practical and the visual effects together, now I think they're at a point where they really have mastered that technology. So it's interesting to see what's going to come next, because I think every time you get this advancement in technology that's available for the entertainment industry, you're always going to get this overreaching um, adoption of that
mm.
technology, and it's going to ruin movies for a little bit, and it's going to make them comical when you look
Yeah,
back on them and watch. But eventually they'll catch up to it and learn how to
yeah,
use it correctly.
yeah.
I think, and I should ask you though, what do you think is the next big advancement in movies?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I think like to an extent the same, it's the same films that we know and love that just require a camera and like some people on screen. Like those are still going to exist, but in terms of like what's really pushing the frontier, I think that interactive, like interactive elements seem to be the exciting thing that I can see taking hold, just because like people love interaction, right? It's like in today's society where like so many things are like constantly stimulating your mind and it's easy to get distracted with all the different things that are going on, like videos are getting shorter and shorter. It's like it's hard to get someone to sit down and watch something that's like 3 hours long, like The Godfather, right? Even though The Godfather is amazing, right? It's like it's just the attention span is just decreasing, and it's harder and harder to do it unless there's some sort of element that makes it more than just you're sitting there and watching, right? And I see that as like interactivity. I just think about something like Bandersnatch. I don't know if you remember what that is, but like the Black Mirror episode, which was interactive, where you can like kind of choose the character's actions and then have the outcome play out differently as a result of what action you chose. Like I think that was super super innovative because like I mean it's just borrowing concepts that already exist in like Mad Libs or something like that, right? Like super simple, but like to actually execute that on a platform like Netflix where you're watching it on a screen that is small, right? You're watching it on like your laptop or like your like living room TV, and you have the ability to actually interact with it because there's already a pre-made interface built into your computer, right? Like you can't do that in the theater, but it's leveraging the technology that is streaming and creating this interactivity to it that makes it like really novel and really interesting. Now, I don't think like we've seen a repeated success of something like that since then, but I imagine that especially with like how well it was received, that there are people who are working on that kind of stuff right now.
Definitely. And I think that, it's going to take some time for them, for the creative people that want to pursue that to be able to integrate that into their workflow. Once it's done, you're going to see a lot more of that kind of entertainment, and it's going to be quality entertainment.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is coming along and is going to be it's going to be more widely adopted, not so much by the industry, but by the consumers, is going to be augmented
Mm,
reality, mixed
yeah.
reality, and virtual reality, to where that is going to allow that interactivity at just another level. Instead of using your remote to choose, you're going to be able to actually turn your head and take a different path in the movie.
Yeah.
And when it gets to that level, it's almost on the level of a game, but there's a story behind it. How you get to the end of the story is really up to you,
Yeah.
right? And I'm looking forward to seeing more of that type of adoption in within the entertainment industry. Um, is there anything else out there that you think is like just around the corner as far as innovation, and it hasn't quite caught on yet?
Mm. There was this entire topic that we actually talked about a good amount in one of my classes in film school. This idea of like transmedial entertainment. I don't know if you are familiar with that term, but it's just like the idea that let's say you have a story or you have a narrative or you have a franchise that can that story can be told across different media, right? Like it doesn't have to just be a movie. It can be the movie and also the roller coasters that were inspired by it and the action figures that it spawned. And like there might be an animated series for a live action movie that enhance the existing narrative, such as if you think about like Star Wars, right? Like Star Wars, the prequels were followed by the Clone Wars, which are an animated series that are canon, right? It like details the actual story that happened in between I think like episodes 2 and episodes 3 of the prequels, right? So like that kind of thing, it's like really cool how like to truly follow the entire narrative you have to be experiencing it in different media. And as there are more and more platforms every day, right? Like TikTok is such a crazy thing right now, and everybody's trying to copy that. YouTube's like creating their own short video form. Like Instagram started Reels or whatever. Like that's just like really taken off in the past couple of years, right? And then you have something like Clubhouse. I don't know if you've like gotten onto Clubhouse, but like that's also a new social media platform where people are talking and like exclusively just like talking about things. And like as these kind of platforms come out, there's new forms of media that can get wrapped into the transmedial experience, right? And so I think like if creative people are creative enough, they can just keep adding these new platforms into it. And as a content creator, you and I, like that those are also things that we can think about, right? Because it doesn't have to be the big studios who are pushing out like Marvel movies and then leveraging these platforms to like add on things on top of the existing narrative. It can also just be you and I in terms of the content that we create and how we can leverage these different media to create like our own transmedial experience for our audience, right? So I think that's like really it's going to be a constantly developing thing because the nature of transmedia is that as more media forms come to fruition, they're going to get wrapped up into the existing umbrella. And I think that's going to be constantly exciting.
You know, you reminded me of this artist that I used to follow on Twitter. I probably still follow him, but I just can't remember who he is. 'Cause you know, you interact with some people for a little while, and then you lose contact with them. Well,
Yeah.
this is what happened with this guy. But this guy had such a unique method of marketing. Well, it was unique in my perspective, right? I hadn't seen it before, but
Hmm.
he would make a painting, and he would take that painting somewhere in the world, and he would leave it there, and then he would drop clues on Twitter to drive his audience members to find it, right?
Wow.
So you know what geocaching is, right? I'm sure you're
Yeah,
familiar
yeah,
with
yeah.
that. So he took the concept of geocaching and he actually gave real world valuable products away to his followers, and it exploded his Twitter account. But that's kind of what you're talking about, where
Yeah,
you
yeah,
you you take your, you know, whatever your platform is, and you expand your platform into the real world using other types of technology or other types of media. One other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is in the movie Godzilla versus Kong that's out right now, one of the
mhm,
characters in that film is a podcaster.
yeah.
And it made me think that, you know, if if they had adopted this idea that you're talking about, they could have had that character actually have a real
Oh,
world podcast where
yeah,
it was talking about things that were going on in King Kong
yeah,
Godzilla world, right? And it would probably really take off and it would be a great marketing tool.
yeah.
So yeah, those are some ideas that that certainly could take off. Now I've heard of another thing called augmented reality gaming. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with that term?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think of like Pokemon Go, right? Like
Yes.
that's like augmented reality gaming, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's very similar to what you're talking about, where you're using, um, like it's been done in films successfully, and I can't remember the references, but there's this podcast or audio drama that I've been listening to called Rabbits, and it's based on that whole concept
Hmm.
where you know, you the main format is either audio drama or movie or whatever, and then the people that are watching can interact the um, with the entertainment in a real world way by getting involved the outside of the audio drama or outside of the movie. It's just it's a very cool concept. I'm glad you brought that up because I think you're right. I think that is right around the corner for mass media or mass market adoption.
Yeah.
Now that that'll bring us up to talking a little bit about your YouTube channel, and then we will talk about the movie that we have agreed on because it's a cool movie. There's a ton of information that I found, but first I want to give you a chance to talk about your YouTube channel. I saw your first video, awesome video. You have a high energy. Now you're also an actor too, is that right?
I wouldn't say that. I've done a little bit of like performance arts in the past, and I do think that if I have opportunities to act in the future, that I would love to do so. But for the respect of the craft, I can't call myself an actor yet.
Okay, fair enough.
Hopefully one day. Hopefully one day.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you seem to have the chops, man. You certainly have that high energy, that engagement with the audience. I mean, it's really like I'm sitting across from somebody who's telling me and has that excitement level about what they're presenting. Um, so, talk a little bit about your channel and why you started it and what your plans are for the future of it.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do so. My YouTube channel is just like this project that I've been wanting to start for a while, and like every single time I think about like, okay, what do I want to do next creatively? It always comes back to YouTube. And the reason for that is because I'm the kind of person who is constantly being kind of like, I wouldn't say distracted, but like being inspired by new things. And I have a hard time like pinning down one specific type of thing that I want to do, for the rest of my life, or like whatever on some sort of like long-term time scale or whatever. I One day I'll be doing X, and then the next day I'll be like, oh, but Y looks really, really interesting. And so I was looking for a way to kind of combine a lot of the different things that I'm already doing and kind of contribute them to a single platform or space in which I can share that with other people, right? Like I will do like all of these things regardless, but I do want to share that with other people. One, because I think like it just enhances the experience for myself, because like if I'm creating something out of it that is to be shared, then I'm thinking more intentionally about like, am I actually, I don't know, like manifesting what it is that I wanted to create in the first place. And that's a way to help myself keep myself accountable. So I do it for my sake, and also because I think like I have a lot of interesting things that I can share to other people, whether it's in terms of like my art or in terms of like just my ideas or my analysis about films, for example. And so that's what the motivation behind the YouTube is. And in my first video, which I hope everybody who's watching will check out, it's a introduction to myself and the creative journey I've taken to get where I currently am. And I use the Pixar movie that just came out last year, Soul, to talk about how there's this idea that we all have some sort of like unique purpose on this earth, and there's like that one thing that like is the driver of your life, and once you find that one thing, you're set, like that's what you do for the rest of your life. And I've never found that because I've always been interested in so many different things. And so like my answer to the question of purpose is that it's okay to not have a single like spark or purpose that drives your life, and simply by living and simply by being intentional about what it is that you're doing and finding joy in those things, like that is already a life that is fulfilling. And so that's kind of like the concept behind it. And then hopefully in all the videos that I make subsequently, I am demonstrating how I am actualizing that like philosophy in just like the wide variety of things that I do. There's definitely going to be a bunch of like film related content. I think that film is just such a great like foundation where I can use that to share and talk about a lot of different things. But I think I also want to post things that are just like creative things that I do outside of film related things as well. And so that's kind of what the YouTube is going to be. And I've taken that first step of starting my first video, and like it's just all uphill from here in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, it much success to you. I hope that your dreams are fulfilled through that medium, and I really look forward to seeing how that unfolds for you. Uh, Now, what you said to me is a highly inspirational thing, and that's one of the reasons why I put that in the intro when I was talking about you. That you're an inspiring person. So I do plan on. I've already followed the channel. I do plan on keeping up with it. I hope when you said it's an uphill battle, um, or it's uphill from here, it can be challenging to put out content regularly, as you know
Yeah,
from your blog,
yeah.
right? So, the coming up with new ideas for content sometimes is not as hard as actually producing the content and getting it out there. Um, but I'll be watching. I'll be looking forward to seeing what you come up with. And it looks like you've got some followers already tuning in, and you've had some views on the videos, which is awesome. Um, so let's get into this movie Bridge of Spies.
Yeah, let's do it.
And do you have an intro that you'd like to do, or if you don't, I have one.
No, go ahead, man.
Okay. So Bridge of Spies was released in 2015. It's a story of an American insurance lawyer recruited by the U.S. government to first defend the Russian spy Rudolf Abel, and later to negotiate a trade with the Soviets for the return of downed U.S. Air Force U-2. No, sorry, he wasn't a U.S. Air Force pilot at the time, but he was a U-2 pilot, Francis Gary Powers. Um, so the film, it was takes place in 1960, well, late 1950s through 1962, um, and I'm gonna let you talk a little bit about it, what you thought of it, and what you learned from it, and then I've got some facts that we can talk about um, from the character perspective and that kind of stuff, historical perspective.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I will say, I wanted this like to be fresh in my mind, and I hadn't seen the film prior to us discussing this, and so I actually watched it earlier today.
nice.
And I mean, it was a fun watch. Like I knew that, I knew that it was like a Spielberg film. I knew that like it had a killer cast and things like that, and so like I expected to enjoy it, and I did. I don't know like to what extent I should just start talking about it because like I have a bunch of different thoughts. There's like stuff I liked about the film. There's stuff I thought that could have been done better. Where do you want to start?
Well, I really want you to take the role of the cinematic um, review, whatever
Gotcha.
perspective, and
Yeah.
then I'll throw in some of the information that I found on researching the characters, some of the historical context, and that kind of stuff. But um, as far as your overall idea of the film, and also don't worry about spoilers because this is a true story. If anybody wants to
True.
know this
True.
story, they could go look it up. So we're
True.
not really giving anything away about this. There's no secrets, no hidden um, reveals in the movie that you can't find out by doing a little bit of historical research.
Absolutely.
So go ahead. What did you think about the film? And
Yeah,
go for it.
yeah. So I'll start with what I liked about the film because I think it's simpler to talk about. I was really appreciative of the fact that there were certain like elements to the cinematography that really I think enhanced the idea and like foundation of the film. Right? It's like it's supposed to be demonstrating this like paranoia of the time, right? In terms of like American citizens and feeling like there's enemies among us, right? There's spies who look like us, who walk among us, and are actually our enemy, so to speak. And this paranoia is something that can actually be kind of accentuated in the cinematography itself with certain elements, such as like in the beginning of the film, there's a lot of like all sorts of interesting angles that the camera is pointed at, right? Like typically, the angles that you see in a film are kind of eye level, like how we're talking right now, you and me. But there's these angles that are really low and pointed upwards, like up at characters. There's angles that are like high and like pointed downwards, and like just like all of these different angles, kind of it's like it's almost symbolic of the idea that like there's a lot of different angles to look at a problem, or that there's like a lot of different like perspectives that are all being like entangled in this like political thing. And so like that to me is like when you're using the cinematography not just to create an image but to actually accentuate like the foundational elements of the story. And you can also see that in like the lighting, right? It's like it's borrowing a lot of like traditional techniques that originate from like older thriller movies, older like noir films, with like harsh lighting, where like you see like stark shadows. You see like it's like very contrasting, right? There's bright and then there's dark, and a lot of the time it's like contrasting on the same like person's face and whatever, and like all of that stuff I think really enhances the experience of watching it, and it's just like a really nice nod to like older films that are dealing with similar subjects. There's also things like the soundtrack, right, or the lack thereof in the beginning of the film, where there's almost like no music that comes into the film until later on. And that I found really interesting because, yeah, like you typically have a score, right? But in this film, like almost the entire first hour doesn't have any background track. And I think the nice part about that is that it gives an added sense of realism, right? It's like only the events that are happening on screen are what you experience. You don't get like a soundtrack that's telling you to feel like, oh, this is like a really heroic moment, right? Or this is a really desperate moment. And you just kind of get the character's dialogue, you get the sounds that are actually happening within the film, and that is the entire experience. Now, that does change later on, but I did like the way that it set that up. So, like, those are some of the things I liked about the film, that I think maybe, like, maybe are more along the lines of like strictly cinematic, and maybe the average person wouldn't think about as much. Um, some things that I also really liked about the film were this like idea about it's showing two sides of this conflict, right? It's like both the Russian side and the U.S. side, and there's a character who, despite being in the American environment, he is advocating for the idea that, hey, this person is just the same person that we would like view heroically, right? Like this person's a good soldier, this person is a good spy, they're a patriot, they're just a patriot for the other side, right? But these conflicting ideologies, it it's not that clear that there's a right and wrong. It's more that they're conflicting. And so in this conflict, Mr. Abel, the person that the Tom Hanks character is supposed to defend, he sees this person as a patriot, whereas everyone else is seeing them as a traitor, right? And I really like the way that his conflict with all of the other characters really pointed to this like ambiguity of what is truly right? And I thought that was really interesting. So that was already a bunch of stuff, but like those are the things that I liked about the film.
Well, that's why it's interesting to hear the perspective of somebody who's coming from a cinematic viewpoint, right? Because you are looking at things, just the little subtleties that set up a scene to draw you in and make you feel like you're there, right? Um, so I want to take a step back really quick and set it up. It's the film is filmed in a timeline that's chronological, but it's over a period of 5 years, I think, or roughly 5 years. And it starts out with the arrest of Rudolph Abel, who is a Russian spy. Um, and this guy is a career spy. He is not just, he's not a joke, man. This guy is, he started out with the Russian KGB before they were the KGB. He started working for as a spy for the Russians before World War II, and he continued his espionage through during the war, and then after the war he came to the U.S. because as most people know, or I don't know if you know this or not, but the Cold War started right after, and some people say it started during World War II. So the Soviets already knew that they wanted to have spies embedded in the United States right after the war, and that's what this guy did. He came over here on a fake passport, or didn't need a passport at that time. He had a fake ID, fake birth certificate, and he came over here, set himself up as an artist. Um, and he was caught, and that's where the story begins. The story that of the movie that we're talking about. As you were talking about the lighting and things like that, and when they were in his room, it really gives you this sense of ominousness, right? Because this dude's life is over, and he knows it. But he's at the same time, he did. Did it strike you that he was so calm?
Yeah.
No matter what was thrown at him, he remained calm. Now, they didn't really give his backstory, but the dude went through World War II as a spy. So
Mm.
he's been trained, and his entire life has been spent in learning how to adapt to these type of situations. So without really knowing that, you just think this guy's super cool customer, right? But then we find out, or if you do some background on the character himself, um, you find out, okay, this dude is a cool character because he's done this kind of stuff his whole life. Um, so that brings us up to where you were talking about James Donovan, the attorney that represented him. He was, he was not the first choice of the U.S. government, but I think he was probably the best choice because of what unfolds later on.
Yeah.
This guy he's no joke either, man. He's not just somebody that they cherry pick. Now they paint him as this insurance lawyer, right?
Hmm.
And they don't really go into his background that much. They do give a little bit of his dossier, but he attended Harvard Law. He was also in the Navy he was a commander in the Navy, and he worked for the OSS,
Hmm.
which is the precursor to the CIA. So he was also in intelligence.
Oh,
And yeah, I found this out when I was doing my research for the film. And these characters, the movie was great. It was an excellent movie. Um, the acting was spectacular, but I feel like they could have done a better job at fleshing these characters out. And I mean, it
mm,
was already a long movie,
yeah.
so it would have been just even that much longer. But I feel like that these characters were not given enough of a backstory. So with that, that brings us up to where you left off, and you said that the film took a turn, and it did start to go into a little bit of a different place. But continue with your assessment, and then I'll drop some more historical context into it.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm learning so much, by the way, because I specifically chose not to look at any of the historical stuff because I wanted to bring like the pure, like I don't know anything going in. I'm just watching this from like the cinema perspective. So yeah, appreciate all of that. So yeah, so what I wanted to say, starting from there, is that like there were things that I felt like weren't as balanced moving forward from the initial trial, because there's like two arcs, right? It's like the arc that leads to the ultimate like trial of Abel, and they even appear in front of the Supreme Court and everything. But then there's like arc two, which is when there is basically a hostage exchange, and I felt like Act one was really nice. I really appreciated a lot of these elements, especially the ones that I was talking about before. But then Act two is kind of where I felt like it started to lose its complexity. It started to feel like too black and white to me. Like there was like a clear like bias toward like basically the Americans at that point, and it felt too much like a hero movie. And like I'll explain why I felt that way. Like Act One, there was this really interesting balance where you saw how this fear and paranoia of the Soviets was kind of spreading among all the people and turning them into like an angry mob, right? And then among this population, Donovan is the one guy who seems to actually hold the ideals that America cares about and preaches as the sacred like law of the land. And he says, the rule book is all that matters because that's what separates us from everyone else. It's the fact that we have this set of values that demonstrate our belief in equal treatment under the law, the right to a due process, like all of these things. And the interplay between him, who is really strong in these beliefs, versus the average American who kind of just sees it as, oh, we're Americans, so we're right, and they're the Soviets, so they're the enemy. Like I thought that was really interesting, and I wish that carried forward, because moving forward, once he became the hostage negotiator, it felt like it started to lose that interesting balance, right? And specifically, right, like there are scenes where it's showing, for example, the U.S. hostage, right, Abel, who is still in U.S. prison at this point. He's being treated very nicely, right? Like he gets woken up by the guards to be taken to the hostage exchange, and they like are very patient with him. They're very nice with him. They like kind of repeatedly tell him, "Hey, get up," and then they like kind of like gently carry him over to like where he needs to be, right? Even though he's kind of like drowsy and whatnot. But then that's juxtaposed against how the Russians are treating Powers, who is the pilot that you mentioned, and they're basically like torturing him, right? Like they're shining bright lights in his face, not letting him sleep, pouring water in his face, asking him hard questions and interrogating him. And like from the actual factual perspective, there's got to be that kind of interrogation on both sides, right? But they only show it on the Soviet side, and they only show how the Soviets are treating this guy really poorly, while juxtaposing that against the Americans treating their guy like really nicely. And that's where I kind of felt like it started to veer into like unrealistic in a very like overly patriotic way, and that's where it kind of felt more generic as opposed to like a really complex movie to me. In addition to that, what I also noticed was that once Donovan actually arrived in East Berlin, and started interacting with the Soviets and also the East Germany folks. Um, these people seemed like kind of incompetent. Like he kept like outsmarting them. He kept like pointing out their mistakes. Right? There's like a moment where Mr. Vogel, like this East German lawyer guy who is representing Mr. Abel's family, actually forgot the names of his clients. Right? And Donovan actually pointed that out. It's like, no, that's the daughter, not the wife. And it's like, I mean, I get that Donovan's a smart guy, but Mr. Vogel should also be a smart guy. Like, if he was chosen to handle this very sensitive, like, situation, they should have picked their top guy, and yet he's like not even getting his clients' names correct. That just felt like very unrealistic and purposefully inserted in there to make them seem incompetent. And then there was also like, I don't know, like there's these moments where like Donovan keeps outsmarting them. He's just portrayed in the movie as like this insurance lawyer who somehow has risen to the world stage and is outsmarting all of these top Soviet officials and whatnot. And that just kind of felt like they're painting this Tom Hanks guy to be like way too heroic, and it felt like a missed opportunity, because not only does it I feel like unrealistic, it also kind of dampens the victory for me. You know, like when he finally accomplishes what he does, which is an amazing feat, it feels a little bit more hollow because he achieved it over people who were incompetent in the first place. Right? Whereas if these people were just as smart as he was, if these people were just as competent and showed how smart they were, how crafty they were in their negotiations, then his victory seems like a bigger feat and a bigger deal. But personally, it felt like that handling of the situation starting in Act Two kind of took away from the overall impact of the film for me.
Interesting perspective. I could see, after hearing your assessment of it, I could see where um, they did kind of force that ideology onto the audience. Now it does go back to a period of time where American ideals were sensationalized, and Soviet ideals were demonized.
Yeah.
So that's playing into the historical perspective as well. Um, because, well, Francis Powers, he was tortured. I don't know that he was waterboarded or knives taken to him, but he was certainly sleep deprivation, and
Hmm.
they used enhanced interrogation techniques, like we could call it, I guess, because the Soviets really wanted to get information out of him. Um, Abel, on the other hand, was not giving up anything. Again, a career spy. This dude had been through, I don't know if he'd been through this particular situation, but he had been heavily trained to resist his captors at every possible opportunity. So it seems like it would have been less likely for the Americans to try to get stuff out of him other than try to subterfuge, or trying to trick him into giving something up. But when they
Gotcha.
realized he was giving them nothing, they probably just let him be. Um, but the part where they go into East Germany, where Francis Powers was being held, I want to set that up because it's important for historical context. Not everybody knows who he was and why he was in captured by the East Germans, or why he was in a prison in East Germany. He was captured by the Soviets. Um, he was flying over Russia in a U-2 spy plane, taking pictures of their military bases, their sensitive areas, and his plane was shot down, which is something that nobody ever thought could happen up to that point, because the U-2 was known for not its speed, but how high it could fly. It could stay out of range of other planes and missiles um, that were used to counter or deter these type of flyovers. Um, in this particular instance, he was shot down and captured, and then brought to East Germany because of this exchange. But before that, um, he was captured in 1960 and convicted based on you know the evidence that they had against him um, in the court in the Soviet Union, and sentenced to 10 years. So he would have served 10 years in a Soviet prison or work camp up to that point. When this opportunity with Abel made itself available, then the Soviets agreed to it. They brought him to East Germany, and that's where the exchange was going to take place. That's why the movie took place in East Germany. East Germany at that time, 1961, I believe, was at the very beginning of the building of the Berlin Wall. So
Yeah.
this was a city divided. Now imagine in your city where you're living and having somebody come in and put this wall up in your city, right?
Yeah.
So the place was, it was worse than the Wild West, right? There was law on both sides, but on one side it was super oppressive and trying to keep everybody in. On the other side, they were just trying to get as many people out of it before that wall came down.
Yeah.
And that's a reality. That's not like a biased, non-objective perspective. That's exactly what was going on. The Soviet Union wanted to close off the West, and you know they were doing it literally with this wall.
Yeah.
So that brings us up to the point where Donovan is, and he was cast into a role, and even some of the people that were alive during that time and involved in this situation said that the filmmakers took some creative license to portray Tom Hanks in that hero role. Uh, but I mean, that's Hollywood, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So you can. Aside from that, I mean, the film was beautifully shot, like you said. It was a great film. It did have some flaws to it. Um, they did go a little bit overboard with portraying Tom Hanks's character as this, do-gooder, but he really. I mean, I looked at the guy's background, and he was, besides this, defending Abel and standing up for him against everybody in his country who thought the guy should die. Um, he was also involved in the Nuremberg trials. I don't
Mhm.
know if you knew that or not. I didn't know it until I started researching him. But he was.
I think it's actually like very briefly mentioned in the film, but
Oh,
like,
was it? Okay,
yeah, it's just like one line in there.
okay. I didn't catch that, but yeah, you might be right. Um, he was, and he didn't have a big role. He wasn't, representing or prosecuting anybody. He was an assistant, but he was still there at the Nuremberg trials. And if anybody doesn't know what that is, that's when they were trying the Nazis for war crimes after World War II. Um, and then, he was also involved in getting prisoners released from the Bay of Pigs uh, fiasco, which happened after this incident. So the guy really was an exceptional human being,
Yeah.
and I think that's what the movie was trying to portray. But they were taking um, instances from different parts of history and trying to combine them into this one
Yeah.
moment in history to make this
Yeah.
guy greater, bigger than life, and his deeds bigger than. Although it was a monumental, the deeds, what he did was monumental, no doubt about it. So that sets up your next point of assessment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like the most interesting thing about these kind of like biopics is the extent to which it's like historically accurate, right? Because when you evaluate a piece of fiction, let's say, a lot of the time, a lot of the evaluation comes down to, oh, was this realistic, right? If it's a fictional story that's portraying something that's supposed to be realistic, then the question is, okay, well, is that actually like something that would make sense in real life? And it's interesting because sometimes the truth is actually stranger than the fiction, right? It's like stuff happens in the real world that you wouldn't even write because it's just so far-fetched or whatever. And I'm not saying that this is like exactly that because I don't think it's that extreme, but it is interesting how like someone might be portrayed as really exceptional in a film, and you might be like, oh, like this guy like there's no way he would have been this perfect, right? Like there's no way he would have succeeded in every way like he did. But when it's based off of a biopic, it's very likely that that actually happened and this guy really was just that cool, right? So I think that's always a really interesting point. And yeah, like the film definitely mentions, like I think, yeah, it briefly mentions Nuremberg. I think it did kind of downplay his background in terms of like his military service, in terms of like his experience with this kind of stuff already. Like as you said, right, he was already involved in intelligence, and like that didn't come through in the film. So I think it was trying to show like more from the perspective of this like interesting thing, how he was an insurance lawyer and he kind of took like a insurance guy's like perspective on how to solve the case, right? He was like, think about it in terms of insurance, right? Like you want to keep this guy just in case one of our guys in Russia gets held captive and we need to do an exchange. And that's exactly what happens. And I thought that was like a really clever way to tie in his insurance background with like what he actually accomplished. But as you said, like he actually just already had an intelligence background in the first place. And so like those kind of things didn't necessarily come through. But yeah, it's like this guy really was really was as accomplished as the film made him out to be. So I definitely think that like I think he deserves this heroic portrayal, and I think Tom Hanks did his thing as he always does, and he did a really great job in portraying this person.
Definitely agree with you on that. Uh, the one thing that um, well, so at the end of the movie, not giving away any spoilers because obviously we know that Gary Powers was released
Hmm.
and Abel was released into the Soviet, uh, and he went back home and lived out his life in Russia, where he was actually born in England. I didn't know
Yeah.
that his native country was England, but his father was from Russia, and his father took him back to Russia,
Mm.
and then that's where he got indoctrinated, or whatever you want to call it. Because his father was a hardcore communist, and that's where that all started.
Yeah.
But there was one other character that was pretty important in the exchange, because in the movie they portrayed it as this was a do or die deal. On the CIA's From the CIA's perspective, they were like, no, this guy got himself in trouble. We don't really care about him. We need to get Powers back. And Tom Hanks's character said, no, we need to get this guy. He's an innocent kid. He's accused of something that he didn't do. We need to get him back. It's just the right thing to do. Again, portraying Tom Hanks as the do-gooder,
Right.
who who sees things from a different perspective, which was
Yeah.
kind of cool, because it really was the right thing to do to get this kid back. He was there, and he didn't need to be. He shouldn't have been there to begin
Yeah.
with. He was a funny enough. I don't know if you knew this or not. He was an economics major.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was there studying or writing his dissertation,
Yeah.
and that's the reason why he got caught. His dissertation was, and I looked it up. Um, it was an analysis of Soviet bloc foreign trade. So the East Germans saw this, and they handed it over there to their Russian handlers or keepers or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And these guys said, "Well, this guy's got to be a spy. You know, he's got to be a spy. Look what he's writing about."
Yeah.
And so they kept him, and he spent 6 months in a jail cell. He wasn't torture or anything, but um, he was subjected to some pretty harsh treatment.
Yeah.
And I mean, anybody that spends 6 months in jail that doesn't deserve to be there, that's harsh treatment, in my opinion.
For sure.
So they do you want to do the final scene where the exchange happens? You want to do your assessment of how that played out, or did you have something before that?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a great place to go. Yeah, so I'm a person who's it's funny. Like I think like when you watch a film, you also definitely bring in like your own personality into your assessment of it, right? And I'm like a really pragmatic person. So when I was, watching Donovan, insist that no, like we absolutely have to get this kid, and the CIA is like, no, like we don't care about this guy, like he's not important to like our intelligence efforts or whatever. Like I've kind of siding on the CIA, right? I was like, you shouldn't try to botch this entire mission like for the sake of getting a 2-for-1 deal, right? Like from my perspective, I was like, this is kind of a like this is not even a fair trade at this point, right? It's like you're asking for too much. But Donovan, being the kind of heroic guy he is, and being a little bit idealistic, he very much insists on getting this kid out of there too. And I do think that the way they treated it, these like shared moments between like him and Abel in those final moments, and him like even at that moment like really being concerned, like, okay, so when you go back, like what are they going to do to you? Like are they going to kill you? Like are they going to let you live a happy life or whatever? And like all of that exchange between the two characters, I thought was a really nice touch, because it shows that like there was a mutual respect between the two men, right? Like there is a friendship that developed between them, and there was an appreciation for the fact that like even though they have different allegiances, even though they come from different countries and have different backgrounds, that like ultimately they could respect that they each like stood up for what they believed in, and that's like something that is just like really powerful and really human. So I think that was probably my favorite part about the ending, the fact that it kind of like brought back some of the stuff that was happening in the first act that I really liked, and kind of maintained that in their final moments of friendship. And ultimately, yeah, like the whole like he succeeds in his negotiations, like that you kind of already know is going to happen starting from the very beginning of the film. But like I think the way that they handled it like was a nod to some of those overarching ideas that I thought are a little bit more nuanced, right? They're a little bit more complex, and they're not so like black and white in terms of Soviets bad, U.S. good, like Tom Hanks amazing, like all of that, like really simple stuff. So I really did like the way they treated that aspect of the ending.
Perfectly said. And one thing that I would add to that, or expound on, because you already alluded to it, but it's a human story, right? And
Yeah.
these are big ideologies that are at odds. The Western capitalism versus the Eastern communism. Those big ideologies are what is at odds. The people within those countries, they could get along as best friends if they had met under other circumstances, and that's
Yeah.
what this movie
Yeah.
portrayed in a very overt way. It's just they're just people. They're human beings doing what they believe is right, standing up for what they believe is right. And as far as it not being a fair deal, I I think the Russians would have given up a lot more than just Francis Gary Powers, because Abel, he was like I said, he was a career spy, and he had probably so much knowledge
Yeah.
and
That's true.
information
That's
that
true.
he didn't reveal, and he could have at any time.
Yeah.
And like you said, if when they let him go, if that deal botched and Abel was taken back to the U.S., that might have just been the straw that broke the camel's back, where he just says, you know what, I want my freedom. I'm just going to give you guys everything you want. So, and then the other thing was, he was convicted of 30 years versus Francis Gary Powers 10 years.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So that was a big. I think the Soviets would have given up a lot more than that grad student, and it was actually the East Germans that wanted to keep that grad student. They're the ones that almost botched that whole deal. You remember that
Right.
part?
Yeah.
Because they were like, "Yeah, we captured this guy. He's our spy. What do we get for this guy?"
Yeah.
And ultimately, they got to save face, right? They
Yeah.
got to they got to say that they released a spy and they were involved in this exchange between the Soviets and the Americans, and that was their big reward for letting an innocent person go,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it all did play out in the end very well. It was really kind of a warm feeling that you got when Abel and Donovan's character, said their goodbyes and showed that mutual respect for each other. I really liked that part. I think that was probably my favorite part of the movie, um, and it was really well done. The exchange took place on the Glanniki Bridge, which at that time separated East and West Germany. It's still there, and if people want to go visit it, it's not real hard to get to.
Mm.
It's a huge historical landmark to visit. Anytime somebody's in that part of Europe, I highly suggest that you go check it out. I would absolutely go if I could, and hopefully one day I'll be able to. But the exchange took place February 10th, which they did portray that it was very cold. It was in the middle of the winter there in Germany, and 1962 was the year that it took place. And that was the end of the movie. However, those people had lives beyond that movie, and all of those people involved in that film were extraordinary people, in my opinion. In fact, I would say that most people are extraordinary. At certain points in their life, every human being has an opportunity to be extraordinary. Most people step up to that and are
I
able
love it.
to do that. Um, and yeah, I mean that's where that film left me. I really had a good feeling after that, watching that movie, and it gives you hope for the future. We're in tough times right now. Um,
Mm.
there are some things brewing on the global landscape that are a little bit alarming for anybody who looks at things from a historical perspective.
Yeah.
Um, but there still is. It's not the end, man. The world isn't ended, so it's not over till it's over, right?
Yeah.
So, anything else that you would like to say? Any final thoughts about the film or anything that we've talked about?
Um, no, I think I covered it. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely things I liked. There were things I thought could be better, but um, yeah, overall, it was definitely an enjoyable watch and just like very well crafted. Like it's what you would expect from a film that was kind of co-made by Steven Spielberg and Coen Brothers, right? It's definitely very polished and um, it's like a story that required deft hands and was, I think, given it the talent that it deserved, and also having Tom Hanks play the character, that definitely, yeah, I think it was a good biopic. There's some really bad biopics, but I think this one was pretty good.
Yeah, it's up there in one of my top favorite movies. I'm a big sci-fi fan. When you were talking earlier about some of the types of films you like,
Hmm.
my favorite movies are the movies that take me away from reality. Other than war movies, for some reason I like to watch war movies, and it's not about the gore. It's
Yeah.
about the 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 human struggle. I just enjoy seeing uh, people overcome odds. Like I was saying earlier, everybody's given an opportunity to do extraordinary things, and most times people will step up to that.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what I enjoy about those movies. And this, I would categorize this as a war movie, Cold War movie, right? It wasn't a shooting war, but there were certainly a lot of things at play that could have turned it into a shooting war at any time.
Yeah.
Um, and I love your assessment of the film. I love to hear your perspective on it, not only from the perspective of a film student, but from somebody who sees things from outside of the American culture. You've lived in America your whole life, so you know that perspective well. But you also grew up with a family who has come from another country, so you see that perspective as well. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear different people's takes on how things are portrayed. I really enjoyed that. So, if you would just let people know how they could get in touch with you, how they can follow you on the social media and what your website is and that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, if you were interested in anything of the things I had to say, I plan on creating content that is very relevant to films. it's going to be a manifestation of some of the things that I've kind of talked about today in terms of my own personal philosophies when it comes to creative things and whatnot. So definitely check out my YouTube channel because that's like my next big creative endeavor, which is just my name, Rock Sue. And then you can also find me on my website, www.rocksue.com, just my name. It's 5 letters. There's not a lot of people with only 5 letters in their entire name, so it should be easy to remember. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, very much appreciate you coming on the show, Rock, and I'm glad we met. Really happy to know you, and I look forward to seeing how your future YouTube career unfolds.
Yeah, you too, man. This was really fun.
Great. So everybody who tuned in tonight, I appreciate you guys being here. And for people who are watching this afterwards, thank you so much for checking out the channel. Um, Please do check out Rock's channel. I'm not sure if you have if there's a way to find you on YouTube yet, but if you go to your website, right, you have links to the YouTube channel.
I actually don't. It's so new. I haven't even put it up there yet. But I'll definitely do that as soon as possible, and
Right on.
it should be connected very soon.
Very cool. And this video will remain on YouTube, so people who watch it in the future, they'll be able to go to your website and find the YouTube channel. Anything else that you'd like to say, Rock, before we head out?
Um, no, man, I think I'm good. This was really fun.
Right on. Well, again, I appreciate you being here, man, and you have a good night. And hopefully, maybe in the future you come back on.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of great movies that we can talk about that are totally relevant to this kind of stuff, and I think each conversation will just build upon the next. So, yeah, love it.
Right on. All right, then have a good night, Rock.
You too, man.
Take care.